And in for Amy this morning is Sean from Elmwood Park.
Get a little more excited about it, will you please? A little more excited.
You've worn me down after 3.5 hours. Yesterday, Christopher Wray, Trump's nominee to replace Jim Comey as head of the FBI, was before the Senate and did very well. I thought one of the interesting moments, which was relatively uncontroversial, non-event, his confirmation hearing. But one of the interesting statements he made in response to inquiries was that if the president asked him to do something he thought was improper or illegal, he would resign. He didn't say that he would memorialize that conversation in his Hello Kitty dream diary.
And then leak it?
To leak it to the New York Times so he could later testify publicly about it before a congressional committee to further aggrandize himself at the expense of doing his job and at the expense of the reputation of the FBI. So I thought that was nice relief on his part.
Now, is he 7 feet? Does he like to dress in women's clothes? Can we get a normal fella in there, for God's sakes?
He seems like he's a normal fellow, but the question is, he received so many plaudits from both sides of the aisle. How are we to interpret this? Listen to this compendium of senators' responses to Christopher Wray's testimony.
If you're confirmed, and I believe you will be.
From my point of view, you're the right guy at the right time. Good luck.
Lindsay.
On a more serious matter, I know you to be a decent person and a good and devoted dad, so I think that's a pretty good start here.
Well, I'll be very candid with you. I'm going to vote yes. I see him as being a good FBI director.
High five.
Mr. Wray, I've been very impressed.
And here we go, Stuart Smalling.
With our meeting, I've been impressed with your testimony here today. You've come here at a hard time. This is under very extraordinary circumstances, and I thank you for your willingness to take on this job. And
cut this guy off.
I'm looking around. I'm feeling that you've had a good hearing today.
You're good
enough. Best of luck to you.
That's from Al Franken, obviously, and that's an indication of just how good the writers at Saturday Night Live were during his tenure at SNL. For more on the topic, what kind of FBI director will Christopher Wray make, and how will he fly in formation with justice as well as the special counsel, Robert Mueller? We're pleased to be joined by Ron Hosko. He is former FBI assistant director and now the president of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Ron, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good to be with you again. Good morning.
So how should we interpret the bipartisan celebration of Christopher Wray yesterday?
You know, I thought his commentary, his demeanor yesterday, the circumspect nature of his responses, in ways is perhaps what the FBI needs. I know the men and women who work there, who are really dedicated to keeping us safe from terror and fighting all the whole manner of crime that they are challenged with, are looking for the FBI to kind of be pulled down under the radar, the political radar in America. They've been in the center of the storm for a year, and I know they just want to get on with their important work. And if Mr. Wray's appearance yesterday is an indicator, perhaps he's exactly what they need at this time.
Well, Ron, too many of these political scoundrels like him, so I automatically don't. However, that being said, is there ever going to be a situation where the FBI, I am really troubled with this Uranium One and Bill Clinton Bagman. I know I sound like a dog with a bone and I can't let it go, but to me, it is a primo example of the political prostitution of our government, where Bill Clinton gets a $7.5 million check. Next thing you know, the Secretary of State, his wife, lets the deal proceed, and they've got 20% of our uranium. Can we get somebody with a badge to investigate this?
It's a good question, and it could be that some of that is going on behind the scenes. Much of what the FBI tries to do is out of the public view. And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately in some cases, with dogged reporting and some leaks of information on important cases, whether they're from government or from defense attorneys or from potential defendants. A lot of their work gets exposed to the public view, perhaps prematurely, and where we're all making judgments about what we would like the result to be, and politics starts to encircle the case, and it's frustrating for the people who work there, because day in and day out, the FBI's job is not to comment on ongoing activities. It's unfair to them. It's unfair to would-be defendants, and we saw a lot of this being played out yesterday, where Christopher Wray was really acting as a straw man or the foil for the political views of the senators.
Right.
In fact, I think that Mr. Wray acquitted himself much more effectively than did most of the senators who wanted to hop up on a soapbox and apply their political views on Donald Trump, on Russia, on any manner of things, rather than getting to the substance of Christopher Wray, the nominee.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what they do, and he's obviously too smart to fall for that. He knows exactly what they do. Just a kind of a question of first principles, given the special prosecutor, Bob Mueller, and the Russian collusion investigation and how kind of open-ended and parameter-free it is. How should this work? When the FBI and justice, and in the cases where there's a special prosecutor like this one, how should it work, the interaction between those entities?
Well, in this case, as you said, I think Bob Mueller's charter is pretty open-ended. It's pretty broad, and I would caution against any belief that this is going to be resolved within the next year, within the next 18 months. He's hired a substantial staff. I think that is a first indicator of what he sees as the scope of his mission today. And I'm talking about just on the attorney side.
Mm-hmm.
That staff will also be added to by FBI agents who have been working Russia influence over the campaign, counterintelligence agents, certainly white-collar specialists, probably both existing agent workforce, maybe from other agencies as well, and I would think some retired folks, too, would come in and join as investigators, people with the right bona fides. But I think this is going to take a period of time. I do hope that it is that there's not a steady drip of leaks, which I think is unfair to everyone. And I think it's going to be complicated when you're talking about overseas engagements. We're talking about Russia. When you're talking about cyber intrusions that are complicated, when you're talking about the work of our national security agencies, NSA, potentially CIA, and others who have top secret collection methods that are going to be subject to examination by Mueller. This is going to be complicated, and it could be that a good portion of the participants, of the players, are overseas. They may be overseas banking transactions, communications data, and somehow Mueller's going to have to get the other side of those communications, not just the U.S. side, and try to find witnesses that could potentially testify and validate what he believes. So I think it's going to be complicated and long.
Now, Ron, I always like the movie Minority Report, where we arrest people for, before they actually did something.
Pre-crime unit.
So I like all this.
Sure.
And I like all this intent verbiage, how the intent is this and the intent is that. I've got a question for you on intent. When Comey writes notes and gives it to a teacher, specifically knowing he was going to leak it to the New York Times, is that intent to commit a crime? What is that?
Yeah, listen, I work for Jim Comey. I work for Bob Mueller. These are two pretty darn smart guys, and I think what Jim Comey's intent was to, and I'll take him at face value, his intent was to spur the appointment of a special prosecutor, of a special counsel. Let's assume for the sake of argument he got exactly what he was looking for. I think part of his intent, too, was to defend his reputation that had been scourged publicly by the president. Whether you like Jim Comey or not, I think reasonable people might agree that the manner in which he was terminated and the subsequent public comments by the president were disgraceful. There's a way. Jim Comey left an incredibly lucrative private sector position to come, and just like Christopher Wray, there's recent reports where he made $9.2 million last year as an attorney. He's going to get a tiny fraction of that as FBI director.
Well,
for a heck of a lot more headache.
You may some may argue though that Jim Comey's politicization of the FBI, as per Rod Rosenstein's explanation of his termination, was also a bit disgraceful.
I think that reasonable people would agree on that too. I think that Jim Comey went far beyond the bounds of what any prudent FBI director, assistant director, special agent in charge would do, because it is not their charter. It is not part of their mission to give public comments on an unindicted subject. There are a lot of folks who thought that she should have been indicted, but that is the job of the Department of Justice, of federal prosecutors, not of the FBI. Apart from what Jim Comey saw behind the scenes with Loretta Lynch and the tarmac meeting, I mean, there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, and I think he could give a reasonable defense of his actions, but they were still far beyond the bounds.
Yeah.
And certainly potentially grounds for removal. So saith a lot of reasonable people who have a lot of experience in federal government.
Let me ask you about the ongoing investigation and how important the media is, because it seems to me, boy, as open-ended the investigation is, and the possibility they'll look at the Clintons and the possibility they'll look at perhaps the Russian government working in liege with liberal partisans, left partisans, Democrat partisans to try and trip up the Trump administration or the Trump candidacy prior to the Trump administration. Those are all possibilities based on some aspects of the story that have surfaced. But it doesn't seem like that's certainly not central to the D.C. press corps narrative. And I wonder how the D.C. press corps narrative influences these investigative bodies to focus where the attention is being given by the media, as opposed to maybe where there could be additional substantive work to do on other tangents to the story. You see what I'm getting at?
I absolutely do. I think that there are times when the work of the press is quite valuable. People who are party to transactions, who know about transactions, corrupt and otherwise, know they have an outlet in the press, a willing outlet in the press. Bob Mueller is certainly a consumer of headline news and going even deeper than just headline news. I don't think he's a consumer of one particular outlet over another. He's a smart, experienced guy, but I know he is a consumer of the news. I experienced it in working with him. Where we're watching and scanning, and he's expecting answers. However, there is a corrupt part of the mainstream media, I believe, a very corrupt part. I read the Washington Post every day. The Washington Post has an axe to grind. They want nothing more than to discredit the Trump presidency, to undermine his position as the elected candidate, the elected president of the United States. And you can see in every section of their newspaper on a daily basis attacks on him that are one-sided and unfair, and perhaps in many cases unproven, or will be later proven inaccurate. There is bias in the media, and it's the risk of us as the consumer. It's the risk to us that if we're listening just to one voice, and you see this on cable news as well, if you listen to one version of events, one voice, one panel of purported experts, all of whom share one view, you're going to be skewed in your understanding. And so it really demands us as the listener, as the viewer, as the consumer, to be smart, to listen to alternate theories, and because you cannot trust the mainstream media to provide that to you. It's a shame. It is a shame.
All right. He is Ron Hosko, former FBI Assistant Director now the president of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Ron, thanks again for joining us. Appreciate it.
Great to talk to you.
And he joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
If you're talking